Mary Cummins was born in Dublin on the 24th of April 1905 and grew up in the Richmond Road in Drumcondra. After school at the Dominican convent in Eccles Street, Mary landed a position as teacher and governess for the family of Baron Paul Ignace de Fierlon in Brussels, and later became a translator with the Canadian Embassy. She was still in Brussels when the Germans marched in May 1940. Although she wanted to get back to Ireland, she was persuaded to lend a hand temporarily to a nascent resistance effort formed around Constant Martigny and Joseph Domery, who both worked in the Belgian Civil Aviation Authority. Martigny, who had managed to get to London before the debacle of May 1940, was parachuted back into Belgium in October 1940, and he quickly established contact with his colleague Joseph Domery, who was already busy exfiltrating Allied soldiers and pilots out of the country. Backed up by intelligence service agents from the UK, the Martigny-Domery network was soon sending the intelligence it gathered by radio back to London. By early 1941, Mary, who was known to her family as Aunt Bunty, was reporting to the local network chief, Edgar Klimpel. Mary's work, in her own telling, ranged from translating secret messages and liaising with British agents to smuggling weapons and helping escaped Allied prisoners. Towards the end of the war, Mary told the Irish diplomat Con Crenan that her motives for engaging in resistance activity were, quote, fundamentally charitable and to some extent financial. This chimes with German documents that indicate that she received monthly compensation of 1,000 Belgian francs for her resistance work. Alas, Klimpel was arrested in February 1941 with the contents of his notebooks greatly facilitating the German counterintelligence efforts to close down the network. More documents seized when Constant Martigny was caught some weeks later led to a complete dismantlement of the Martigny-Domery network. Mary's account of her own arrest in an RTE documentary broadcast in 1993 is somewhat unclear. She tells of being arrested along with a number of her fellow resistants gathered in a Brussels restaurant one evening. But a moment later, she talks of a Gestapo officer walking into her apartment early one morning while she was still in bed. What we know for certain from Mary's war pension file is that at the moment of her arrest, on the 24th of February 1941, Mary had an address at 41 Rue du Lac in Brussels. After spending several months in cell 157 in Saint-Gilles prison in the city, she was one of a party of 39 people, including Edgar Klimpel, who were deported to Germany. Mary was brought to the Fühlsbüttel prison outside Hamburg in October 1941, sharing a cell with another member of her resistance group, Zoé André. Accused of espionage and activities favouring the enemy, she and her 38 co-defendants were sent to Berlin in the spring of 1942, where they endured an 18-day trial at a courthouse at 3 Lehrerstrasse in the Moabit district of the city. Martigny, Domery and Klimpel were executed, as were a number of others, while Mary was condemned to a 6-year prison sentence. She was then balloted from one prison to another around Germany. In July 1942, she was sent to a facility in Anrath near Düsseldorf, then sent to the women's prison in Lübeck in November of that year. She also remembered short periods of confinement in prisons in Bremen, Cologne and Essen. Speaking to RTE some 50 years later, her recollections of her ordeals were sometimes vivid, sometimes a bit hazy. She remembered being stuffed into cattle wagons like sardines with other prisoners as she was shuttled around Germany, and being periodically strip-searched. She also recollected being tasked with washing and repairing the blood-soaked gloves of shot-down pilots at one stage, while contemporary documents from 1944 indicate that she was assigned to Flechtarbeit, or braiding ropes. Mary also testified that whereas German prisoners were brought down to underground shelters during air raids, foreigners like her were not. And she recounted to her RTE interviewer about the time she spent time in solitary confinement after being found with a pencil. But Mary Cummins' contention that she witnessed episodes of cannibalism is unverifiable, and her claim to have been sent to Ravensbrück is not backed up by archival records. However, during her imprisonment in Lübeck, Mary Cummins did meet the Cork nursing sister Kate McCarthy, who was arrested in northern France in June 1941 and did end the war in Ravensbrück. From Lübeck, Mary was brought to a prison in Cottbus, southeast of Berlin, in April 1944. By this stage, lack of food and warm clothing, as well as overcrowding and poor sanitary conditions, meant that Mary's health was already in steep decline. She suffered from dysentery, bouts of vomiting and fainting. Cut off from the outside world, she lost all sense of time. Whether she knew it or not, Irish officialdom was on her case. Pressed by her sister Lucy in Dublin, the Department of External Affairs tasked the Irish minister in Berlin, Con Cremen, with taking up her case with the German authorities. Cremen continually badgered the Germans about Cummins throughout 1944, and later that year the Germans suggested she could be one of a number of Irish prisoners that could be exchanged for German detainees in Ireland. Among the Irish citizens, besides Mary, who were set to benefit from this scheme were Cecil Atkinson, Robert Armstrong and Robert Vernon, all interned in Germany for resistance activities. The scheme did not go ahead, but Con Cremen did finally get permission to visit Mary in Cottbus prison on the 27th of September 1944. Cremen then pleaded for Mary to be released on health grounds, resulting in her receiving a pardon in late 1944. After a lot of bureaucratic confusion, she was finally freed in January 1945 and brought to the stud farm of Irish horse trainer Charlie Mills in Staffelde, 45 kilometres northwest of Berlin. This is where the Irish legation had taken refuge after the legation premises in the German capital were bombed out over a year before. In more than one respect, Mary was lucky to have been released from Cottbus when she was. About a month later, the prison was hit during a 400-bomber raid on Cottbus in February 1945 that killed around 1,000 people. And by then, the other Irish prisoners mentioned in the failed prisoner exchange scheme, Vernon, Atkinson and Armstrong, were all dead. Mary Cummins did not actually stay all that long in Staffelde. The rapid Soviet advance convinced Con Cremen to move the Irish legation and Mary to a hotel in Salzburg at the start of February 1945, then to another hotel in Bregenz in March, before the Cremen retinue ended the war at the Fugger Castle in Babenhausen west of Munich. From there, Mary was evacuated to Bern and then to Paris, where she was treated for decalcification of the spine. In August 1945, over 4 months after the end of the war, Cummins travelled back to Brussels, finding lodgings at 36A Rue Jourdan, not far from the prison of Saint-Gilles, where she had been locked up in 1941. After a stay in Dublin, she returned to Brussels once more, moving into a hostel in the Ixelles district of the Belgian capital in 1948. Although the process took over 4 years, Cummins found it relatively easier to claim the status of political prisoner than Agnes Flanagan, another Irish resistante in Belgium and subject of a separate video. A war pension was duly granted to Mary by the Belgian authorities in May 1949, her case having been handled by a Belgian government law officer, a commissaire de l'État, called Guy O'Kelly de Galway. In August of that same year, Cummins married O'Kelly, who was 12 years younger than her, and the couple moved for a time to a house in the Wicklow Mountains. However, Guy and Mary did not live happily ever after. In her own telling, on the 20th of July 1964, Mary accompanied Guy to Dublin Airport for a business trip he was to make to England. Mary never saw Guy again, despite attempts to trace him. Mary lived the rest of her days alone and died in Dublin on the 20th of June 1999.